And Joan, I believe, was there as well, right?
Yes, I was. Well, you want to just start it. We'll try to get a couple of
There we go.
I've seen that now.
Yeah.
Pictures.
All right, so we want to start.
Okay, hand to Duggan.
Put it right.
And
right
then I'll give you
on that one or
On the
the.
play.
a few details about dinner tonight.
Okay. Well, we go from the we go from the sublime to the ridiculous, and noting the hour, and soon going to be 5 o'clock in Michigan, and I hope I don't go to 5 o'clock in some of the more western time zones where I know some of us have come from. I've entitled this talk 2 Days in Hell, 1 in Purgatory, and in 12 in some kind of paradise, or It's Just Walking, an account of hiking the Haute route from Chamonix to Zermatt. That's the final place that you get to on this hike. It's called the Matterhorn. It's the third tallest mountain in Switzerland. And so I'm going to, thanks to Joan, I'm going to we're not going to do point to point. It's just going to stream while I continue to drone on, and you'll be allowed to just watch and hopefully not fall asleep. This is just going to stream. So when I mentioned to John that I was going to do I'd like to do a piece on the hiking the Haute route, which just got back from. Is it not working, or?
Go ahead talking. I'll see if I can do this.
At any rate, he said that we don't, at these oral presentations, at these conferences, we don't really do travelogue. So I decided to do a little social commentary. So this is really a social commentary wrapped around a travelogue. And when Joan asked me whether I wanted to, earlier this year, whether I wanted to hike the Haute route with her, of course I said yes. What could be wrong with 2 weeks in the Swiss Alps, natural beauty wrapped around chocolates, cheese, wine, raclettes, and camaraderie? And then when I mentioned that I was going to be doing this to some of my friends and compatriots, am I not doing?
It's not going for some reason. It should be just going. Go ahead, Tom.
They asked me what sort of training I was going to be doing for this excursion. My response was, it's just walking. After all, I'm at the age of 61 in reasonably good shape. I had hiked up to the top of Mount Washington a couple of times some 30 years ago. And how could the Alps be any harder? I had passed my stress test that the doctor ordered for me a couple of years ago and survived what I call my annual physical, which is a climb up about a 0.7 of a mile bike ride outside of Frankfort, Michigan. Some people may know where M22 is there on the western side of Michigan. And this is an annual gut buster. And when I told my extended family after I had done this bike ride that this would be in great training for the hiking the Haute route, my sister said, "Well, you're going to get spanked." So 6 weeks ago, and John, I do thank you for your efforts here in getting this thing going. 6 weeks ago, Joan and I alighted in Switzerland, and we met up with another group of 5 people on the road between Chamonix and Argentière. I was wearing my 30-plus-year-old hiking boots, some ripstop nylon cargo pants, dry-fit T-shirt, carrying the rest of what I was going to be wearing for 2 weeks on my back. My companions had taken their training a lot more seriously. One of them lived at altitude. A couple had been hiking in the Sierras. The third had been in the Rockies, and Joan had done 2 10-mile hikes along Lake Michigan. I had played golf. Let me back up. Why would any reasonable person want to hike the 180 kilometers up the Alps when you can get there just about everywhere by bus or train? Other than the Mallory-esque response, because it is there, I cannot provide any rational answer. I'm not an adventure tourist. I have no bucket list of things I need to do before exiting this orb, nor a need to prove myself, nor even a death wish. I live a mostly sedentary life in a Midwestern city. My idea of a walk is to go to the Starbucks, get a cup of coffee, and do the Sudoku.
But there he is, look. He did
This was going to be way outside my comfort zone. Yet I didn't have a good reason not to. And for Joan, it was fulfilling a 20-year ambition that she'd had. And at the least, I could provide some sort of a baseline against which others could feel good about themselves. And I could provide her some encouragement. She was going to be hiking on 2 surgically repaired, cortisone-injected and gel shot injected knees. I still had all my original body parts.
Did I see a cable running down that mountain too?
Yes, from time to time we cheated.
How long do you want to dedicate?
So, well, it was about 2 weeks, and I'll get into that. Don't worry. I mean, you'll be fully informed. So, 6 weeks ago, I was off to Switzerland. Anyone interested in hiking the Haute route has to get to either Chamonix or Zermatt. Zurich is the closest airport to Zermatt. Chamonix is closest to Geneva. But there are few transoceanic flights to Chamonix, or to Geneva, so Zurich it was. We departed the same day that hundreds of people had died in Syria from a gas attack. Once we were there, we came face to face with the war on terrorism. There were submarine-toting military types in the airport. Wow. Did I say submarine? I meant submachine gun. Submachine gun. Wow. I'd been in Paris for the 100th anniversary of the Paris Commune and had seen uniformed police carrying single-shot carbines on their shoulders, but never a slung across the chest at the ready, short barrel, extended clip magazine, automatic weapon. Of course, I had to ask what make it was, and was informed it was a German Heckler and Koch. I did not ask if there was one in the chamber. As metaphors go, this was an interesting introduction to Switzerland. If you've heard anything about Switzerland lately, it may have been about 3 things. The first is the ban on minarets. The second is that the provinces are debating whether to limit the number of vacation houses in the cantons, because in places like Valais, which is where the Haute route is, as many as 80% of the homes are owned by foreigners, principally petro oligarchs from Russia. And the third issue is the elimination of the various bank secrecy provisions that have allowed tycoons and despots to squirrel away billions and billions of dollars in the bank accounts of Zurich. This is what you would describe as a curious mix of xenophobia and welcome. Less well known, however, is the crisis in the one unifying core element of a nation of 8 million people. It's less than the population of Cook County, Illinois, spread across an area that's less than a third the size of Illinois, which is, a little larger than Cook County, despite what you might think. And they speak 4 languages, and mainly divided evenly between the Catholic South and the Protestant North. And that is the national military. According to published reports, 48% of the nation's 19-year-olds are able to avoid this national service. And not just the Roger Federers. Given that women are automatically exempt, one may wonder about the national ethos of a nation built on strict neutrality enforced by a citizen soldiery that relies on only 1/4 of its citizens to sacrifice for the common good. William Tell must be a distant memory. Oh, and did I mention that this conversation with the German or the Swiss military types was in English and not French, in which I am moderately conversant? These soldiers said that the Swiss, quote unquote, prefer speaking English to French. This admission by a Schweizerdeutsch proved prophetic as to events later on in the hike. According to the Swiss Air In-Flight magazine, 63% of Swiss speak German as their native tongue. Another 20% speak French only. Speak French. 5% speak Italian as their native tongue, and another 0.5% speak this very primitive primitive language in the Romance family called Rhaeto-Romansh. Used to be known as Romansh. Spoken in the eastern Alps, up in the high country. 10% speak something other. I didn't establish what the other is, but I suspect it has something to do with the minarets. Train travel in Switzerland is remarkably efficient. Said that from Zurich you can get to anywhere that is serviced by trains inside 3 hours, and that's about right. You can buy a Swiss rail pass good for a set number of days, and this proved invaluable later on the trip because it allowed for free travel, even apart from those days you were traveling by train, on the car postale. And as we found later on, when we didn't want to hike, we could take one of these car postales, which is this huge bus, from one town down the valley and then snaking back up. The roads were unbelievable, switchback after switchback. And can you imagine one of these mega tour buses doing a switchback? Sometimes they even had to back up, and I was scared looking out the windows.
You can only hope for the serenity of the driver.
Exactly. And the idea is that the Haute route covers 5 different valleys, and all those valleys come down to a different little town along the Rhone River, starting out with Martigny, Sion, Sierre, Visp, and then Brig. The Haute route, however, was mapped out about 100 years ago by the Swiss Alpine Club. In fact, this year the Swiss Alpine Club is celebrating its 150th anniversary. They just elected its first women president, and I can remember back in the 70s when Switzerland as a nation actually enfranchised women. So 40 years from enfranchisement to the presidency is not too shabby. After all, it's been a century since the women have had the vote in the United States, and there's no woman candidate on the horizon. What is also remarkable is that it was the Brits who mapped out a good portion of the Haute route in the 19th century. I guess they figured that it was too boring to be hiking up in the highlands and getting Scotch whiskey as the beverage at the end of the day, and they decided they wanted to go elsewhere and get wine. The Swiss had been living in these valleys for centuries and apparently never thought to walk between them. They must have known something that I didn't. Well, let me mention a few things about equipment. As I said, you're carrying what you need for 2 weeks on your back. And at least you have to carry a change of clothes with you so that you can wash out what you have on that night, put on the new stuff, and then hopefully by the morning you will have dried and you carry that with you to your next destination. So this had better be light, and it better not be of cotton. and with the exception of your socks, not wool either. You'll need a water container, and in that respect, the camelbacks or platypuses or platypi are what people use, because you have a tube that comes off from your backpack. You snuggle the camelback into your backpack. There's a tube coming out. You just suck on the tube when you need some water. You don't have to reach back and get a bottle or something of that nature. So fleece and Gore-Tex are the regulation ways of staying warm and dry. And you'll need, for the more remote cabins, a towel and a sleep sack, as no linens are provided. At best, a duvet. And along the way, we'll see some pictures of some of these cabins we were sleeping in, if we haven't seen them already.
We did. We saw the 9 mats in a row. It was the worst place, right? The 9 mats in a row.
So, plus you'll need a change of footwear for the cabins. Hiking poles are desirable, but you better have checked your luggage, because they'll be confiscated by the TSA if you put them in your backpack. And you can put your Swiss Army knife in the check bag too, because you'll need it to cut your moleskin bandages that you're going to need to cover your blisters. And for the cheese that you're going to take with you to fuel you during your hike. Of course, you can always buy a Swiss Army knife in Switzerland, by the way. You can get the 3-inch variety, which has a corkscrew, for 29 Swiss francs. And then you'll have to forfeit it at the airport. And then there are the boots. The boots. I was wearing my 30-year-old boots. I'd worn on a couple of these local hikes with Joan, and they presented no problem. But what I didn't realize is that your stride is different when you're hiking up and down than it is on flat land. When you're hiking up, your heel is chafing against the back of your boot and rubbing it mercilessly. And when you're on the descent, your toenails are getting jammed into the front of the boot. So my boots were a little low tech for this experience, so I quickly felt the agony of the feet. But that doesn't begin to describe the hike. The first 2 days, as I said, it was hell. What I didn't realize was that Switzerland has rainfall that varies between 97 inches and 37. And we were in the part that averaged about 97 inches of rain a year. So we were hiking essentially in a rainforest. My Gore-Tex jacket was soaked through, and the sealant that I had applied to my leather boots had worn off after about the first half mile. So by the time we got to the first night's cabin in Latour, greeted by a couple of mules that were braying, I was feeling some kind of pain. Fortunately, there was wine at dinner and some convivial French charpentiers who were celebrating their annual holiday. They were elated to learn that I was from Chicago, where Al Capone still supposedly rules the roost, and surprised that I ate peanut butter. In between shots of some kind of hooch, they took our picture. Wash, rinse, and repeat for the next day's hike, into the fog and rain, though aided by a chairlift to the Col de Baume, which is at the Swiss-French border. There were no border guards there greeting us. Eventually the weather broke, but not before we had to pass the first rock pile of a trail, where all they had to help you around were chains that were like anchored into the side of the rock.
He was breathing heavily.
I was breathing heavily, and there was, at this time, I wished I'd brought a helmet, because there was one false step and you'd be slipping into a granite abyss. Let me describe some of the Swiss geology. The Alps were formed when the North African plate jammed up against the European plate, and apparently they are still rising. The rock is overwhelmingly granite, but every so often you'd see a layer of marble with its distinct veins. Later on the hike, there were these landscapes that were so black and bleak desolate, you thought that you'd be on the moon. And they had to be volcanic in origin, and of course with geologic flux comes volcanic action. Keeping your eye on the rock was in front of you, directly in front of you, was absolutely a necessity, because any false step could be your last. There are a couple of occasions when, even on some of the flat portions, I would take my mind off what I was doing. My ankle would bow, or I'd slip on something, and it was scary. So, by the time the weather had cleared, my feet were really crying out to be amputated. But I had not purchased the evacuation insurance that is sometimes recommended, so I soldiered on. En route to the Col de Fourcroy, we saw our first glacier, which had receded about a half mile from its farthest advance. I had descended some 2,000 feet from the Col de Baume, and every step down was an ordeal. At the Hotel de Cour de Fourcroy, our co-op group shared a single room, dormitory style. I again drowned my sorrows and met two Irish hikers who had accomplished in one day what it took us two to do. "You're animals," I exclaimed. I later learned how right I was, and they also took our picture. The next day broke, I think that's Col de Fourcroy.
No, actually, this is Christiane and Zermatt.
Oh, okay,
I've
sorry.
been through the-
Okay, sorry.
I
I'm
go
going a little
faster than
fast.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the next day broke clear and cool, and we went to Champay Lac, and I went by bus and train, giving my feet a day of rest. And there I did abandon my boots and got the new ones that were sufficient to hike in the Himalayas. Not that I'm planning that one. Joan is, though. That's what she said while we were driving up. She wants to hike in the Himalayas next. Well, we passed by Martigny, and Martigny was settled by the Gauls in 57 BC. And Caesar made a trip through there, and Hannibal did too 150 years earlier. He tried it with elephants. He got supposedly to the Col de Bernard, couldn't get by, and had to go back and went around closer to the Matterhorn. So Hannibal's foot soldiers were the first of the Haute route hikers. 20 centuries later, and not to be outdone by his military idol, Napoleon, with 45,000 people, men, horses, cannon, carriages, passed through the Col de Bernard, which at places is less than a meter wide. This is immortalized in Jacques-Louis David's painting of Napoleon crossing the Alps, showing a red-caped Bonaparte astride a white horse, rearing on its hind legs. At that point, I would have been happy to have half of my legs working. After passing from France into Switzerland, the entire hike is in the province of Valais, or in German, Valais. Valais is known for its wine. The Humann and Dole varietals are common, but don't look for them at your local foremost, because the Swiss keep virtually all of their wines to themselves. It's known for its beer. Valaisanne is Valaisanne is splendid, and its adherence to the Roman Catholic faith. And though adjacent to Protestant Geneva, it provides many of the Swiss guards at the Vatican. Vineyards blanket the hillsides, and the local churches, some with onion domes, are invariably Catholic. For 1,000 years, Valais was a pawn in the struggles between the German province of Bern and the Burgundian French province. When Napoleon came through in 1800, he declared the Republic of Valais, and the canton was formally united with Switzerland at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. The Haute route is roughly 3/4 in French-speaking territory, and the last quarter of it is in German-speaking territory. Well, I'm going to spare you the details of most of the rest of the hike. Invariably, the weather broke clear, cool, sunny, with a high in the 70s, no rain to dampen our spirits. But I'd like to just indulge you in a couple of vignettes. 3 days after getting new boots at Champs-Élysées came the most formidable hike of the trek. Though we went less than 9 miles or 14 kilometers from the Cabane de Montfort, and I think that's been one of the slides up here, to the Cabane de Prat-Fleuri, we made 3 ascents above 2,600 meters, and that's about 8,600 feet, descending about 1,000 meters each time, came within spitting distance of 3,000 meters, which is nearly 10,000 feet. We called this the Triple Bypass Day. We left at 8:30 in the morning to the drone of cowbells echoing through the valley as cattle herders drove their herds into the mountains. The sun lit up the ice bowl of the Grand Combin, which had loomed over us for 3 days. The other end of the horizon was the massif of Mont Blanc, still shrouded in clouds. The guidebook said that the time it took to complete this segment was 8 hours. We took 10, less than a mile an hour, and barely made it to the next cabane in time for dinner. Along the way, we saw a herd of ibex, the scimitar-horned antelope that come down from the high Alps at this time. Though the rut was months away, the ibex were still asserting their dominance by a foreboding display. The larger one would rear up on its heads with this huge, massive horns and just cock the smaller one, bashing the head. I mean, it was just amazing. Crossing a snowfield, we saw a lava-like desolate wilderness where NASA could have filmed the moon landing, and at least one glacial river. We limped into the Cabane de Prat-Fleuri at 6:30, and we didn't even have time to shower or change clothes. It seemed as if the Thénardiers had moved from the Les Mis, from Montfermeil to the Swiss Alps. Turning on the lights in our 9 across berth cost 1 franc. Showers were 5 francs. Potable or bottled water, you couldn't drink the stuff in the tap, was another 5 francs. Breakfast was at 7. You had to leave by 7:30, and we were all too happy to do so. But that departure was greeted by another climb from hell, on a full stomach no less. The day was highlighted by seeing the Lac de Dixence. There it is. A 10-mile-long man-made lake behind the highest gravity dam in the world, taller than the Eiffel Tower. A week later, in a stop at a local doctor to treat Joan's knee issues, we crossed from Francophone Switzerland to Germanophone Switzerland, and there made 2 immediately noticeable or audible observations. I don't know, what's the audible equivalent of an observation? At any rate, the first, that the people were stouter. The second was that the people were outrightly hostile to speaking French. Most couldn't say a word, and only moderately conversant in English. In Francophone Switzerland, I heard German among the innkeepers and shopkeepers. And if my French faltered, I could speak English. Oh, and the Scotch whiskey, which I had deprived myself of for 2 weeks, was 26 Swiss francs for a glass. At least these exponents of Teutonic cultural hegemony were not carrying automatic weapons. Not quite 2 weeks after embarking on this journey, we strode into Zermatt. Our 7-person group had split and rejoined others along the way. This Irish pair had figured prominently in this rearrangement. My feet had mostly healed, and Joan's leg was much better thanks to some meds. We celebrated with a dinner fueled with Prosecco, red and white local wines, and later grappa, the grape-based rocket fuel, There were toasts to Sean, one of the Irishmen who had taken every possible rigorous option along the way, and there were several times that you could climb up a ladder. I think we saw that slide where you climbed up a ladder to get to glaciers. to Monica and Brenda, two business consultants who had known each other for a long time and reminded me that there may be things more important in life than military history. To Bruce and Ann, the California couple, who often set the pace. To Will, the montagnard as we called him, who vied with Sean to take the most difficult routes and consume the most beer afterwards. And finally to Joan, who had endured my company for 18 days, which was longer than any other woman, than my former spouse, my mother, and my two sisters. And the last three of those didn't have much choice in the matter. This time, one of the wait staff took our pictures. People ask me what the most memorable takeaway from this excursion was, and without hesitation, I say that it was the people whom I met along the way. There was a Hungarian couple who had hiked in the Himalayas and were very competent mountaineers. There were Eric and Stephanie, who had just retired after spending nearly 30 years working for Aramco and were making their way back to the States. There were a group of 4 30-somethings who had graduated from Brigham Young, and they did an annual hike. Their wives let them out of the house. Then there was Okada, a Japanese seaman on a research vessel who piloted the vessel down into the Arctic waters. These and the innkeepers and the shopkeepers and the little grocery store keepers, they were the ones who made this hike memorable. As for me, some people ask whether I'm going to go back and recapture some of those segments that I managed not to make, and I politely decline. I think I'm going to confine my optional ambulatory exercise to the golf course. After all, it's just walking. Thank you all.
Dave, it looks like you took all the pictures.
No. I only took some pictures on my cell phone that are not part of this slideshow. So,
Yodeling, was yodeling part of your experience?
Yes. One day at lunch, there was a guy who was learning to. Oh no, excuse me, not yodeling, but
it was
the
the Alpenhorn. There was a guy up on at the Duggan.
Yeah.
Alpenhorn.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you, David. Really, really well done. You really brought that experience to life.
You mentioned hiking shoes of major occasions. Have you tried hiking sandals specifically?
No, I never tried hiking sandals. No, some people had those as their off shoes that they would wear around the cabins, these Tiva things or whatever they call them.
We did run over a little bit. Would you like to postpone dinner to 7:15 or 7:30? 7:30? I'll give them a call.